Hey there, it's Daphne with Blue Quarry, and in this video I'm going to share with you my process for creating this lace-inspired line and dot mandala. Traditional mandalas are usually a series of simple designs that are painted or drawn in a circular pattern, and dot mandalas are a simplified version where the patterns are formed with varying sizes of stamped dots. In this video, I combine the two methods, starting with a white dot mandala on a dark background and finishing up with a bit of line work to tie it all together and give it a lacy feel. So the first step is to prepare your support board. And my support board is nothing more than a sheet of cardboard that I trimmed down into a 7" by 7" square, and I put 2 coats of acrylic paint on the top and the bottom surface and allowed them to dry, and that's basically just to seal the cardboard. The paper I'll be painting my mandala on is 140-pound watercolor paper that I trimmed to 6" by 6", and I put a thin coat of acrylic paint on the back surface and allowed that to dry. Now, to prepare the support board, I am drawing 2 diagonal lines from corner to corner. And that is doing 2 things for me. Number one, it's locating the center of my board where those 2 lines intersect. And it's also providing guidelines to help me line up my watercolor paper with the center. As long as your support board and your watercolor paper are both square, all you need to do is line the corners of your watercolor paper up on top of those diagonal lines, and you know that both your centers will be aligned. The last thing I need to do to my support board is poke a hole in the center. I'm just using a push pin for that. You'll see why in just a minute. If you'd like more information on my handmade Dot Mandala tools, check out my video linked in the description box below. So in this project, I decided I wanted to create a white border around my mandala. So you see me taping the edge with some washi tape. I am placing the washi tape sticky side up there, and my watercolor paper is unpainted side down right now. So I've got sort of the back surface of both of them facing up as I am taping this down. And I'm just trying to create a nice straight line along the edge. It's not going to be perfect, but that's okay. The whole mandala itself is very handmade and imperfect, and that's part of its character and beauty. So struggling a little bit with the washi tape here, but eventually I do get it taped up. If you do not want a white border, you can go ahead and paint this edge to edge with your background color. You can also paint maybe a larger sheet of watercolor paper and then trim it after it's painted. Those are just some options for you. So I'm going to speed up the video a bit here. I am just applying some craft paint that I found in a coffee color to the surface of my watercolor paper, and I apply several coats. My original intent was to create sort of a linen effect. I wanted to have some little lines going vertically and horizontally to create some texture. In the end, I think I just over blended it, or I didn't like the color that it turned out when I mixed the brown with the white. So I ended up just kind of going over it with a final coat of brown. So that's what you'll see in the end. That's why I'm fast forwarding through this. It's not absolutely necessary to put all these coats on there. You just want to create a background that you're happy with before you go ahead and start adding your mandala to the surface. So here is the background completely dry, and you can see how nice of an edge the washi tape creates. I did get a little bit of that texturing that I was hoping to achieve, just not enough to warrant all the time and the layers that I put on there, but I did get a little bit of that texture on there. Now the next step is to add the guidelines. I always start with my diagonal lines, and that is to get my center located, and it actually provides a guideline for when I'm putting my designs on there. And you can see that it's very difficult to see the line on the dark background when you're looking straight down on it, but if you tilt it to the side or you tilt your head to the side, you can actually see the reflection of the graphite that will help you to locate those lines. Now I'm taking my compass, I'm putting the point in the center and just adjusting it smaller and smaller, drawing my circles to create a bunch of concentric circles. I'm not measuring at this point, I'm just sort of doing it visually to try to create some evenly spaced circles, but the actual size of those circles isn't important. The only important thing is that you keep the center of your compass on the center of your mandala as you're drawing your circles. The circles themselves are just providing a guideline, and you don't have to line anything up exactly with those circles. They're just there to help you out. So my next step here is to secure my watercolor paper to my support board again. And I am using just little pieces of washi tape now in the corners just to keep it from sliding around on me. As another simple option, you could have just left your watercolor paper taped to the board from when you painted the background. Here's a great little technique for you. I discovered this when I was trying to come up with a way to make a little turntable for my support board. I found a little flat thumbtack and I placed it face up on my table, my work surface, so the pointy end is facing up. And then I took a piece of tape and I taped it down with the pointy end poking through the tape. I did that with the second piece of tape, and then I just placed my board with the hole right over that little thumbtack. Now I had a little bit of a mishap here because I didn't line my board up carefully, and when I poke through, I actually poke through a new hole, so I had to fix it. And all I did really, just in case you have the same problem, I thought I would show it, is I flattened the hole down a little bit because it kind of poked up through the paper. I flattened it down a little bit, and then I touched it up with a little bit of my background paint. And it did a pretty good job covering it up. You can't really tell on the finished piece. I mean, I can tell because I know it's there. But the next time I did it, I was a little bit more careful about lining everything up, and it went right through, and you can see that now I have a little turntable. Okay, everything is ready to go, so now it's time to pull out your mandala paint. I have some white acrylic paint that I put in a little container, and I diluted it with a little bit of water. The important thing is to get it to the right consistency. So if you're using a craft acrylic paint, it may be a thinner consistency to begin with. So you will want to test this out and just work with it until you have a paint that works well for you. And I'll show you how to test it out in just a minute. So I'm going to start out by showing you how I dip and apply my paint with my tools. And I'm beginning with my nail art stylus tool. This is something you can purchase at your local beauty supply store, or you can always buy these online on a site like Amazon. Each of my styluses has two different ball-shaped ends. They're used to create tiny little detail dots. To use them, I submerge them completely in my paint well and then stamp them on my paper. If you stamp them continuously without reloading, you'll get progressively smaller and smaller dots. I also made some little ball and styluses out of some straight pins and some Q-tips or cotton swabs. And actually, I find them to be the most useful out of all my tools. So very inexpensive, really easy to make, and they produce really nice results. So you'll probably notice that I keep a paper towel in one hand at all times, and whenever I'm done using a tool, I'm sure to wipe it off. My last tool is just a simple pencil. Now, I bought this unsharpened so that I was able to use both sides of it. The end that you sharpen, I only turned in a hand sharpener maybe 3 or 4 turns. You want to do it until you reduce the diameter of that without making it too small, so that you have another variation in the size dot that you can make. So the eraser end of the pencil is the largest dot that I'll use on this project. And while you can dip once and get multiple prints using a flat circle like a pencil, I wouldn't recommend going much further than maybe 2 dots per dip because the results are a little bit inconsistent. Okay, it's time for the fun part. We're going to now do our dot mandala. I generally like to work from the center out, and I like to start with 8 dots, or petals as I sometimes refer to them, because I always picture this like a big flower. And I locate them, if you want to think about the hands of a clock, I like to locate my petals or my dots at 12, 3, 6, and 9 o'clock to start with. And then I put the dots in between those so that I end up with 8. And the in-between dots end up lining up with those diagonal guidelines that I put in there. So that really creates my starting point. And as I work out from the center, I use the previous rows to help me align my petals in the next row. And so I may end up with petals that are offset just a little bit, so they're between 2 petals in the previous rows, or sometimes I line them up so that they kind of head out straight along those same lines. So now I'm using one of my straight pin tools, and it's the red one, so that's a slightly larger head. And then I'm switching to my smaller straight pin tool, which has that white head. That's how I know the difference. And I'm walking the dots. So I'm creating a petal shape by walking my dots around one side of each one of those larger dots that I just created in that circular pattern. So you can see I'm dipping once, and then I'm going to the very outside of that circle, and I'm continuing to dot. I'm adding a total of 4 dots from that center point all the way down to the inner circle. And now I'm going to reverse the direction. So now I'm adding the dots on the other side of those petals. And what I'm doing here is, you can't really see it because my hand's on top. My first dot is going back onto that same center dot that I already created, that largest dot in that pattern. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want that to be the largest dot, and I want them to get smaller as they get closer to the base. And that is preventing me from having 2 large dots on the end. I just want 1 large dot. So I'm sort of redotting that very first dot in that pattern. I'm sticking with the same tool, and I'm going to my next row. And again, my row is not specifically aligned with any of those circles. I know it's hard to see. I'm not sure if I'm actually on one of the pencil lines. I might be just halfway between, but whatever I do, I'm making sure that every single one of those dots in that one pattern are at the same relative location in the closest circle. And I'm doing a similar walking the dot pattern. This one's a little wider, so you can see I'm sort of creating almost a straight line. I'm not curving as much around that dot. But again, I'm starting with my largest dot just radially on the outside of that row of dots that I just created. I'm doing a total of 4 dots, and now I'm reversing direction. You want to load your tool and then go right back on top of that first dot that you created and continue for 4 dots in the other direction. And you keep doing that until you're done that row. And you see, so I have a little bit of a gap in there. My dots weren't perfectly aligned, so I had a little bit of a variation. So I just added an extra dot in there. It's no big deal. And when you're all done, you won't even notice little variations like that. So I believe I switched to my larger of my 2 straight pin tools and just sort of picked a spot relative to the other dots that I already added and started going around another one of those circles. This time I am walking the dots straight out, sort of radially out from the center. Notice how I'm dipping and I'm going right back into that same dot I just created. It's making that dot a little bit bigger, and I have a total of 3 dots now. And I'm continuing by adding a single dot now on an outer circle there. So you probably don't need the narration at this point. It's pretty obvious what I'm doing. So I am going to stop talking and I'm going to let you watch as this piece progresses. So the dot part of my dot mandala is nearing completion, and for some people this might be the finished product. For me, however, I wanted to give it more of a woven lace feel, so I thought adding some line work would really help to give it that feel. So I pulled out my uni-ball Signo broad point pen. It's a white opaque marker that I love. The one thing that I want to warn you about is that it is water soluble. So unlike the acrylic paint, which once it dries, it's pretty much permanent, the pen that I'm using is not permanent. So if you get this wet, it will smear and even erase, as you'll see at the end of this. Now, I don't recommend this, but when I finished the piece, I was unhappy with one little section or one area that I did on the outside, and I kind of wanted to play with this and see how easy or difficult it would be to fix a mistake. So I do have that at the end of this video. I highly recommend you watch it if you're the kind of person who wants to be able to go back and rework this at any point in time. And enjoy. So at this point, I'm making some final touch-ups to my piece. I decided that some of the larger dots were just a little bit too heavy, so I got out my brown craft paint and I added some smaller dots to the center of some of those larger white circles to make them look like they're hollow. Here you see me cleaning up my pencil guidelines with a plastic eraser. I was able to soften them, not remove them 100%. If that bothers you, you can always touch up with the background paint, or you can use something like a chalk pastel pencil for drawing your guidelines, something that you can wipe off easily. So here's the part where I tried to remove some of those pen lines that I wasn't happy with. I'm just working on those 4 outer corners, and I am using a round blender brush that I had. I chose this because it has slightly stiffer bristles and it just seemed like a good choice for that, but you could probably use just about any brush. You'll want to dip it in water and then gently sort of brush over the surface of the lines that you want to erase. You need to be careful if you're close to any other pen lines that you don't want to erase, so you want to just make sure you're containing the water in the areas that you do want to affect. Notice I really didn't have to worry too much around the dots because my dots were made with acrylic paint that was fully dry, so that's now permanent. It's not going to be affected by water or scrubbing with the brush, so that made it a lot easier. As a final step, I grab my pen again and add some more line details. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe to my channel, give it a thumbs up, and if there are any other videos that you would like to see, please let me know in the comment section. Also, check out my website at bluequarry.com. Thank you so much for watching.